image is merely a synecdoche, right? For Israel in general, and yeah, this is the image. Okay, in his 1995 essay, Projecting Jerusalem, Edward Said expressed his frustration with the Palestinians for not projecting their image of Jerusalem onto the world, and instead letting Israel projecting its own image, in which Jerusalem is depicted as the exclusive, eternal capital of Israel. Said mentioned that while visiting South Africa, a well-meaning friend of Nelson Mandela's received him displaying a coffee table book by former Jerusalem Mayor Eddie Kollek. This is the book about the city to make Said feel at home. Said wrote, "So successful had Kollek been in projecting himself as the supporter of peaceful and ethnic coexistence that even supporters of the Palestinian cause in South Africa had been taken in. As a result," he continued, "I don't see how anything can be done to inhibit or somehow affect Israel measures in Jerusalem without attending to the informational, ideological framework it has erected around the city." So my aim in today's presentation is to unfold a little bit the visual materials that have been supporting the ongoing Western domination in Jerusalem way before Zionism. These visual materials helped and still helping not only to rationalize or justify the colonial project after the fact, but to make it possible in the first place. By analyzing the photos, I will focus on the visual means that readied the Dome of the Rock as legitimate object for ongoing imperial and colonial domination. This process of turning back to archival materials originates from the need to problematize the fixed image of the Orient in visual colonial archive. As soon as the invention of photography became widely accessible in 1839, photographers from the US and Europe turned their lens to Giza, Beirut, Istanbul, and Jerusalem. The Middle East, as many of you know, was the first place outside Europe and the US to be depicted in photography. So rather than referring to these images as reliable historic documents of Jerusalem, I wish to analyze them as a litmus test that isolates the ideologies that the foreign photographers imported to Jerusalem. In other words, these photos tell us less about Jerusalem and more about the relationships of the photographers and their audiences to the city. From the many photo agencies operating in these years, I'll focus on one of the largest, the American Colony Photo Department. The American Colony in Jerusalem was established in 1881 by Protestant Christians who dedicated themselves to charity for the local residents. The colony photographers, like their European counterparts, saw Jerusalem as a living relic from biblical times, and its people the descendants of Jesus and his apostles. The panoramic point of view often used in their photos intensified the air of sacred timelessness, and most of the images are devoid of any human presence. These two traits in Western photographs of the city lent the busy area that was under a rapid modernization process, a mythical ancient feel designed to match the Western clientele's image of the region as an empty land waiting to be discovered and developed by Western enterprises. It was depicted as land belonging to no one and therefore for everyone. While the subject of the photos was depicted as ancient, their technological means were completely modern. Eric Metzen, a photographer and the last manager of the photo department, was responsible for most of its technological improvement, keeping up with the latest trend in the field, such as adding colors to the photos, as you can see here, or producing stereoscopic images to allow a three-dimensional experience, or taking aerial photos. These photos, like many others taken from a safe distance, allowed the viewers to gain an image of the place without seeing the people who lived in it. Due to their high photographic quality, the British Mandate government in Palestine often used the services of the American photographers to commemorate most of the major events that took place until the establishment of the State of Israel. I'll skip the analysis here. I'll say just that the American Colony Photo Department is also an explicit example of the sometimes vague connection between Christian missionaries and Western colonialism. This example makes obvious how these two forces took part in the creation of the Orientalist gaze that legitimized in its turn both Christian missionaries and Western colonialism in a loop of cause and effect. Thanks to the centrality of Jerusalem, its photographs have been the object of many studies in the history of photography and art history. Since the framework of most of those early studies were mainly artistic, the photos were analyzed as part of the Oriental art genre. Ironically, the period of Orientalist photography overlapped with a vast modernization process in Jerusalem and its surroundings that failed to be reflected in photography as well as in art history research. It is safe to argue, in fact, that Jerusalem was subjected to a twofold Orientalization, once by the 19th century photographer who viewed it as the static Holy Land, and then by 20th century art historians who analyzed the photos within the limited Western perspective of Orientalism. The political context and the main trigger of the vast modernization process in the region was the abolition of the Ottoman Empire ban on land purchases from 1867, exactly 100 years before the War of 67. Until that year, only citizens of the Ottoman Empire could purchase land in its territories, but afterwards, land was bought by big Western enterprises and infrastructure projects were undertaken. Thus, in parallel with the market in high-end landscape photographs, the land itself was also now for sale. This shows again how the symbolic takeover and the panoramic gaze and the imperial physical takeover are interconnected. The imaginary Orientalist perspective of the West was captured in the famous 1936 Visit Palestine poster. designed by the Jewish Berliner graphic designer Franz Krauss, this work of Zionist propaganda called on European Jews to visit and immigrate to the biblical land of Israel and real Palestine. The panoramic viewpoint, the dramatic contrast of light and shadows, and the sunset tones in the back all lend the Dome of the Rock area a mythical, sacred air, deliberately echoing the Orientalist style, but with a Zionist twist. With the imperative to visit Palestine, the skyline of the old city of Jerusalem was turned from an object of nostalgic yearning to one of nationalist importance for the greater Jewish diaspora. The poster gained great publicity and became a well-known symbol of early Zionism, while its simple lines and colors made it the source of some recent adaptation used for Palestinian propaganda instead. Among many other examples are these three posters by Palestinian artists. Strikingly, these adaptations show a resistant alternative to the former imperial gaze over the dome. Instead of the pleasant, undisturbed view, they exposed a situation where a barrier wall, an excavator, and smoke clouds block the field of view. As a result, the viewer are confronted with some of the actual conditions of visiting Palestine today. To decolonize the gaze in these cases is to sabotage the viewing of the dome and by that token to sabotage the potential domination. These posters caught my attention also because they echo a kind of apocalyptic wish held by some groups in today's Israel to demolish the dome and rebuild the third temple in its place. After 67 and after the 67 war and the occupation of East Jerusalem by Israel, for the first time East Jerusalem and all its mosques were under Israeli control, and images of the site were everywhere. Reviewing photos that produced or commissioned by Israeli state institutes for Israeli audiences shows that the same panoramic perspective over the Temple Mount that had served American and European photographers was adopted by Israel, but while 19th century panoramas were devoid of any human presence, in many of the Israeli photos, the figure of the observer injects the site with a new set of political meanings. Where it was once depicted as no one's and therefore everyone's land by American and European photographers, the land now had a specific owner who gazes upon it, and he is wearing an Israeli military uniform. I'm skipping, sorry. Okay, the massive appearance of the soldiers' photos in the popular press supported and reinforced official dictates of how this ancient Israel, with its native Palestinian population, was to be viewed by modern Israelis. In the general euphoria following the war, the photos sublimated and suppressed the religious messianic Temple Mount passion and channeled it to military political satisfaction. The gaze of the Israeli soldiers towards the Dome of the Rock reenacted the Christian religious gaze on the Holy Land while secularizing and nationalizing it. Both views lacked the native inhabitants of the area, who are consistently absent from these landscape photos. And to tie the discussion back to the role of tourism and private Western capital in today's postmodern Orientalism, here is a visa advertisement that was waiting for me in Ben Gurion Airport in Israel a few weeks ago. Again, pure serendipity. The ad invited me in English to discover the wonders of Israel with visa. Like the 67 soldiers, the woman embodies the colonizer of her times. Here, it is the tourist that gains overall access to this landscape thanks to visa. From her location on the balcony, her gaze grasps the Dome of the Rock and the Wailing Wall. From her perspective, they seem like pawns on a chessboard that can be moved from one place to another at her whim, even from Jerusalem to Tel Aviv, like the Just Flyed. Similar to the 19th century colonialist, the 21st century tourist's main desire is to discover the Orient but from a safe distance. While Western photographers of the 19th century gained control over the landscape with their cameras and scientific tools, paving the way for the armed soldiers of the 20th century, the credit card seems to be the 21st century tool reenacted by the tourist to fulfill his or her desire to own and to discover the Orient. Thank you.